Welcome to the For Peyton podcast. I'm Tami Valentine, and this podcast is about mental health, real life, and the experiences that shape us. I created this podcast in memory of my son Peyton, known to many as Pete, who passed away in December of 2024. Whether you're here for insight, connection, or simply a deeper conversation, I'm just glad you're here. This is For Peyton. Hi there, and welcome back to the For Peyton podcast, where we have real talk about mental health. In the last episode, I sat down with Brad Huffaker, who recently retired from public education after 30 years. He's also my brother. Brad has seen education from a lot of angles: classroom teaching, technology, career and technical education, administration, assessment, transportation, and district level work. What stood out to me the most in that conversation was that the one thing we talked about underneath all of it was leadership. We talked about leadership in the home, leadership in the classroom, leadership in the building, leadership at the district level, and leadership between schools and communities. He talked about kids needing to be seen. He talked about calling students by name. We also discussed parents needing to stay involved with phones and technology. And we talked about teachers being under pressure from accountability and assessments and cell phones and public scrutiny. We talked about administrators needing to communicate and pausing before reacting, and the need for delegation and follow-up. So today I want to take that conversation deeper from a clinical perspective and bring in the things and the mental health themes that came up throughout the conversation. Because honestly, public education is one of the places where mental health and trauma and family systems and technology and leadership and child development and community expectations all collide. And if we want healthier schools, we have to talk about more than just the students. We have to talk about how adults lead around students. So let's talk about why this matters clinically. Student mental health is not separate from education. A student's ability to learn is connected to their sense of safety, their sense of belonging. It's connected to peer relationships and family stress and online behavior. It's also connected to substance use exposure, attention, anxiety, depression, grief, trauma, and adult support. That does not mean that every student is in crisis, but it does mean that our school systems are caring more than just academics. The data is not saying that every kid is falling apart. It is saying that schools are carrying a real mental health load, and connection, safety, and support are not extras anymore. They are part of the educational environment. From a clinical lens, people do not learn, communicate, problem solve, or repair well when they are constantly dysregulated. A dysregulated child is not in the best position to learn. And a burned out teacher is not in the best position to lead calmly. A reactive parent is not in the best position to collaborate, and an unsupported principal is not in the best position to create a healthy building culture. A disconnected district, not in the best position to support schools. A critical but uninvolved community is not in the best position to strengthen public education. So trauma-informed leadership is not about lowering the bar. It's about creating enough safety, connection, structure, repair, and support that people can actually reach the bar. Informed leadership is, and what it is not in public education. One thing Brad and I talked about quite a bit in our interview episode was the need for structure. Trauma-informed leadership does not mean there are no rules. It doesn't mean that students are never corrected. It doesn't mean that parents are never challenged. It doesn't mean that principals should just tolerate the chaos or that districts should stop using data altogether. And it doesn't mean that communities cannot ask hard questions. Trauma-informed leadership means that we understand that behavior has context. One thing to think about was how Brad talked about when he ran his bus route. He often saw kids come out of different homes, different environments, and that gave him context. So trauma-informed leadership means that we ask better questions before we respond. Instead of just asking, what's wrong with this student? What's wrong with this parent? What's wrong with this teacher? What's wrong with this school? Instead, we ask questions like, what is the behavior communicating? What support is missing? What expectation needs to be clearer? What boundary needs to be held, and what relationship needs repair? What system is creating pressure? And what would help this person or group function better? That's not weakness. That's skilled leadership when we learn to ask those questions. Pulling from the conversation that I had with Brad, I want to talk about some leadership principles that came from that discussion. And we're going to look at 5 different principles. And the first principle that I want to look at is safety before correction. And we're going to look at what this looks like in different environments. So, safety before correction does not mean that we ignore behavior. It means correction works better when the person does not feel humiliated or threatened or cornered or emotionally abandoned. A trauma-informed approach asks the question, can I address the behavior while still protecting the person's dignity? So, some of the conversations that Brad and I had, we looked at, again, these different environments where we see these principles being either applied well or applied not so well. So we're going to start within the home. What does safety before correction look like in the home? So in the home, it can mean that a parent pauses before launching into a lecture, launching into a reaction to their child's behavior. So instead of asking, what were you thinking? It might sound more like, hey, I'm upset and we are going to deal with this. But first, I want to understand what happened. At home, emotional safety does not mean that the child just gets their way. It means that the child knows the relationship is still intact while the behavior is being addressed. And this is how we help form healthy attachments in our homes. And this matters because kids often bring their first experience of authority from home into the school setting. If leadership at home is chaotic or harsh or unpredictable, that child may come to school already braced for conflict and already unsure of whether adults can be trusted. So let's talk about this a little bit in the classroom. In the classroom, safety before correction means correcting behavior without shaming a student in front of everyone. Instead of saying, you're always the problem, it might sound more like, hey, that behavior is not okay. Step over here with me for a minute and then address the behavior between you and the student. The teacher still addresses the behavior, but it protects the student's dignity. And that's something that came up in our conversations in the previous episode, was the importance of the students having a sense of self and a sense of dignity in the home and in the classroom. The other thing that's important to remember is that teachers are not therapists, but they are relational leaders. Students learn very quickly whether an adult is predictable, reactive, checked out, fair, or steady. So now let's talk a little bit about what this principle looks like throughout the building. At the building level, safety before correction means principals and administrators avoid leading through fear or surprise or public embarrassment. A principal can hold students and staff accountable while still protecting dignity. Staff need to know that if they make a mistake, they will be addressed directly and professionally, not gossiped about, not ignored, not brushed off, and definitely not publicly humiliated. Students need to know that the office is not only a place of punishment, it can be a place of regulation, problem solving, accountability, and repair. So now at the district level, what does safety before correction look like there? It actually means policies and accountability systems are clear, consistent, and not driven by panic and control. District leadership can ask hard questions about performance. They can ask hard questions about discipline and staffing. They can evaluate and have discussions about achievement, attendance, and outcomes without creating a culture of fear. Safety at the district level sounds like we are going to look honestly at the data, and we are going to support improvement rather than simply assign blame. Public education does need accountability. After all, schools are publicly funded and outcomes matter. But I will say, accountability without context is just punishment. There's no learning, there's no opportunity for repair and for growth. Again, accountability without context is just punishment. So, what does this look like when we expand out to the community? At the community level, safety before correction means the community can actually hold schools accountable without treating educators and districts as the enemies. Public education should be questioned and challenged, but it should also be supported as it works to improve. When the community conversations become only critical and suspicious and attacking, then schools are automatically going to become defensive. A trauma-informed community will ask questions like, how do we help solve this? Instead of, who do we blame? That shift in conversation and perspective matters so much in terms of that relationship between the district and the community. This one has one of the strongest connections to what Brad and I talked about in our interview. Brad really talked about how kids need to be seen. He talked about calling students by name, and he told the story of a student who told him, "You have always seen me." That's so powerful because it's not just a nice story. That means that that student felt a sense of belonging in their district from the bus driver. That is a young person saying, you noticed me and I matter to you. When a child feels known by at least one steady adult, we are not just talking about a nice relationship. We are talking about a protective factor. So, what does connection before escalation look like in the home? It means that parents build relationships before crisis. That might look like eating together or going for a drive in the car, making everybody get off their screens and actually talk to each other, asking about the child's world without immediately correcting, spending 10 minutes connecting before bringing up the missing assignment, the attitude, or the phone issue. When parents only engage when something is wrong, kids start bracing for every conversation. Connection does not mean avoiding hard conversations. It means the relationship has enough warmth and trust to carry the hard conversation. So what does this principle look like in the classroom? Well, it can be pretty simple. Just greet the students by name. Notice when a student seems off. Remember something that they told you. Use calm proximity before public correction. Saying, "This does not seem like you, help me understand," is a really good phrase. A student is more likely to receive correction from an adult they believe actually sees them. That does not mean they will like the correction, but they're more likely to hear it and respond to it in healthy ways. So what does this principle look like in the building? At the building level, connection before escalation means principles are visible outside of discipline. Students should not only see the principal when someone is in trouble. Teachers should not only hear from the principal when something is wrong. I think that one's really important. I think principals, from my experience, principals do a really good job of being out and connecting with students in positive ways so that students know that they're not just there for punishment. But it isn't always the same for teachers. Often teachers only hear from the principal when something is wrong or when there's another expectation to meet or to ask another responsibility. A principal builds connection by being present in the hallways, in the classrooms, in the lunchrooms, and in staff conversations and ordinary moments. That ordinary presence creates trust before crisis. So what about at the district level? At the district level, this principle means the district leaders know the schools they lead. Not just through spreadsheets and reports and test scores or board meetings. They need to understand the culture, the stressors, the strengths, the staffing realities, the student needs, and the community in context of each building. A district that not only shows up when something goes wrong, A district that only shows up when something goes wrong will always struggle to build trust. District level connection sounds like, tell us what this looks like on the ground. Help me understand what it looks like in your classroom. When teachers hear that from administrators, they feel understood. And they feel like that administrator is seeking to know and understand what their experience is like and make the best decisions on the teacher's behalf. So now let's talk about the community level. At the community level, connection before escalation means that schools and communities build relationships before conflict. Parents, businesses, churches, mental health providers, healthcare workers, coaches, grandparents, local leaders, and neighbors should not only interact with schools when there is a complaint or a crisis or a fundraiser. Healthy school community connection is ongoing. If we want communities to trust schools and schools to trust communities, we have to create more contact points that are not crisis-based. Structure as support, not punishment. This was something that came up a lot in my conversation with Brad. Structure is one of the most misunderstood parts of trauma-informed care. Often people assume that trauma-informed care means less structure, but usually it just means better structure. Structure should be predictable, clear, calm, consistent, and relational. Structure says you're not carrying this alone, you are carrying expectations here. These adults are paying attention. There is a rhythm that we can count on. There are limits around things you can and cannot do. So, what does structure as support, not punishment, look like in the home? It includes routines, bedtime, phone limits, chores, expectations, and follow-through. Children and teens may resist this structure, but that doesn't mean that they don't need it. Their brains are developing and their impulse control is still developing. Their ability to think long-term is still developing, and their ability to regulate emotion is still developing. We, as the adults, have to help them learn how to regulate themselves in that process, especially when they don't always have that ability to regulate themselves. So, what does that look like? A parent can check a phone, or setting a bedtime is not automatically being controlling. Done well, it communicates, hey, I'm paying attention. I'm still the adult, and I love you enough to stay involved. Brad talked about parents not being afraid to check phones and computers and online accounts. I want to be careful here because phone monitoring can be done poorly. It can become invasive and hostile and shame-based, but done well, phone monitoring can be a protective leadership principle in your home. A parent might say, I'm not checking your phone because I'm trying to catch you. I'm checking your phone because I love you, and part of my job is to help you carry things that are too big for you to carry alone. And we know that that's true for students with their phones. That matters because sometimes kids don't know how to ask for help directly. This came up, and this was something that kind of resonated with me personally in my conversation with Brad, is sometimes there's a sense of relief when a person gets caught. And that relief indicates that that person just didn't know how to ask for help. And so sometimes they're hoping an adult notices. Sometimes the structure carries the doorway for a conversation they were not brave enough to start on their own. So what does structure as support, not punishment, look like in the classroom? Well, it includes clear routines, classroom expectations, predictable consequences, transition routines, assignment systems, and calm follow-through. Students should not have to guess what the mood the adult is going to be in and what rules are going to apply for the day. Structure reduces anxiety because students know what to expect. A useful teacher phrase is, the expectation still matters, and I want to understand what is making it hard. I'm going to say that again. The expectation still matters, and I want to understand what is making it hard. That sentence keeps accountability, and it adds curiosity. What about at the building level? At the building level, structure as support includes consistent discipline procedures, clear communication systems, staff support processes, crisis response plans, and predictable expectations. If every teacher has to handle behavior alone, the building starts to become really inconsistent. If every administrator responds differently, trust erodes. A trauma-informed building doesn't avoid consequences, it makes consequences clear, fair, and connected to repair. It also makes support easier to access before staff and students are already in crisis. So what about the district level? At the district level, structure as support includes policies that are clear, usable, and actually supportive to the buildings. District procedures should not exist just on paper. They should help principals and teachers and students and families know what to do next. This includes discipline policy, crisis response, threat assessment, attendance, staff support, parent communication, technology expectations, and mental health referral pathways. Structure at the district level should reduce confusion, not add more to the burden. So what about at the community level? Structure as support means that partnerships need clarity. If a business partner with CTE programs, If businesses partner with a CTE program, what is that process? If mental health providers support schools, what are the boundaries? If volunteers come into the school, how are they trained? If churches or community groups want to help families, how does that happen appropriately? Because good intentions are not enough. Community connection needs structure so it becomes safe, sustainable, and consistent. Then it becomes useful and valuable. So principle number 4 is repair after rupture. This is one of the most important clinical ideas in this whole episode, and I think it's something that Brad and I touched on pretty consistently in our discussion. The foundation of this is that the goal is not perfection. Parents, teachers, principals, districts, communities, we're all going to mess up. And more often than not, people react too fast. We say things poorly. We avoid conversations. We misread situations. We get defensive and we lose patience. The question is not whether or not rupture happens. The question is whether repair happens after the rupture. So let's talk a little bit about repair after rupture. What does that look like in the home? So in the home setting, it can look like something as simple as, I reacted too strongly earlier. I still need to hold a boundary, but I want to handle this conversation better. That teaches children something important. It teaches them that accountability and relationships can exist together. And it models emotional responsibility. Parents do not lose authority by repairing. They actually strengthen it. So what about the classroom? Repair after rupture can happen after a teacher snaps, misreads a student, or handles a situation publicly. A teacher might say, I did not handle that the way I wanted to. I remember a couple of times of having to do this when I worked as a teacher and being able to say, I did not handle that the way that I wanted to. The behavior still needs to be addressed, but I should have pulled you aside instead of saying it in front of everyone. That kind of repair does not weaken authority, it strengthens it. And students need to see adults take responsibility without collapsing into shame or giving up the expectation. So what about in the building? At the building level, repair means administrators follow up. Brad talked about how damaging it is when leaders say they will get back to someone and they never do. That matters. When a principal says, I need to think about this, that can be healthy, but only if they actually return to the conversation. And this was something that came up in the episode. I shared the example of an administrator that I worked with, and I would ask him a really intense question, and he wouldn't say much, and he would say, okay. And the first couple times I was like, why didn't he have an answer for me right away? But in time, I learned that he went about his way, found time to give it plenty of thought, and when he came back, he always had a well thought out answer. He gave me really good explanations, and I felt heard and understood. Even when he didn't agree with me, that relationship was there. And so I always appreciated that he would come back and talk to me. So repair at the building level often sounds like, I haven't forgotten about this. Here's what I can do. Here's what I can't do. And here's what happens next. Follow through is not just an organizational skill, it's a trust building skill. So what about at the district level? Well, repair after rupture means owning when communication, policy, support, or decision making has failed. Districts build trust when they say, we messed something up here. And we need to clarify this. We should have communicated this sooner. Here's what we're changing moving forward. That kind of repair is not weakness. It actually builds credibility. And it models the exact kind of responsibility we want students, staff, and families to practice. So what about the community level? At the community level, repair may mean rebuilding trust between schools and families, and schools and local organizations, or schools and the broader public. Sometimes communities carry old wounds with schools, and sometimes schools carry old wounds with communities. Repair requires honest conversation, humility, boundaries, and follow through. A useful community question could be something like, what would help rebuild trust here? And the harder part is actually doing what we identify that would make the difference. So the last leadership principle that I want to talk about is systems, not superheroes. This may be one of the most important principles for public education. It's actually true for any organization. We cannot keep depending on one amazing teacher, one heroic principal, one over-functioning counselor or one involved parent, or one generous community member to hold everything together. That's not sustainable. Good people matter, but good people need good systems. This is where research on teacher burnout and working conditions matter. When teachers are working long hours and they're feeling underpaid, they're carrying social emotional needs, they're managing documentation and assessments and handling parent communication and still trying to teach well, we cannot frame burnout as just a personal weakness. A dysregulated, unsupported, overextended staff cannot consistently create a regulated environment for children. So what does this look like in the home? In the home, systems, not superheroes, means parents need support too. Parents are often overwhelmed, tired, distracted, and they're trying to navigate things like grief and working multiple jobs and carrying their own trauma. Telling parents do better without offering support doesn't really help much. Parents need tools, relationships, education, community support, and sometimes clinical help. At home, a system might include bedtime routines, phone roles, family meals, chore rhythms, and trusted adults who support the family. In the classroom, systems not superheroes means that teachers cannot be expected to be educators, therapists, crisis workers, social workers, behavioral specialists, technology monitors, assessment coordinators, and parent communication managers all by themselves. Teachers need manageable systems, mentoring, planning time, mental health support, administrative backing, and realistic expectations. A teacher who is drowning cannot consistently create calm for the students. So when we talk about trauma-informed classrooms, we also have to talk about whether teachers have what they need to lead those classrooms well. So what about in the building? In the building, systems, not superheroes, means that the principal cannot be the only stabilizing force. A healthy building needs teams, routines, and communication systems and support that keeps everything together and contributes to a healthy staff culture. If everything depends on one person's personality, the system is fragile. Trauma-informed building asks questions like, what happens when the strongest person is tired? What happens when the counselor is overloaded? What happens when the principal is gone? What happens when the teacher who holds everything together finally burns out? If there is no answer, there is no system. At the district level, systems, not superheroes, means that the district needs to build capacity, not just demand performance. Again, districts need to build capacity, not just demand performance. This includes staffing, training, leadership development, teacher retention, strategies, mental health partnerships, protocols, technology policies, and communication pathways. Districts should ask, what systems are we building so people, let me say that again. What systems are we building so people don't have to survive on personal sacrifice alone? That's an important question, because public education cannot run forever on sacrifice. At the community level, systems not superheroes means community support needs to be organized. It's wonderful when one business, one church, or a volunteer, a retired educator, or mental health provider helps, but sustainable support requires structure. Community school partnerships need clear roles, boundaries, communication, and shared goals. This is especially important in rural communities where schools often function as more than schools. They are gathering places, they're identity centers, they're all of these things, they're safety nets, and they're community hubs. Public education should not be isolated, but it also cannot be saved by random acts of goodwill alone. It needs connected systems. Now, phones and technology. One specific issue that Brad brought up was technology, and that was like his wheelhouse in his 30 years in the district. He talked a lot about internet safety, pornography exposure, phones, cheating, AI, online behavior, and how technology has changed classrooms and parenting. I think this needs just a little clinical sidebar because it affects all 5 levels: home, classroom, building, district, and community. The question is not just how many hours is my child on a phone, but what function is the phone serving? Is it connection? Is it avoidance? Is it escape? Is there secrecy? Is there compulsion? Is there distress regulation? Is it providing social belonging, academic support? Is it a way to numb out? These questions matter because not all screen use is the same. A child using technology to complete homework is different from a child compulsively scrolling at 2 a.m. because they cannot tolerate being alone with their thoughts. So again, the 5 principles apply. Safety before connection. Talk about the phone before it becomes a crisis. Structure as support. Have clear rules about devices, bedrooms, school use, and privacy. Repair after rupture. If trust has been broken, rebuild it with honesty and follow through. Systems, not superheroes. Homes, schools, districts, and communities need shared expectations around technology. This is not only a parenting issue, it's also a school issue, a district policy issue, and a community cultural issue. So as we start to wrap things up, I want to talk about where I bring in my clinical lens. As a therapist, I think about trauma and attachment. I think about family systems. I think about emotional regulation and avoidance and burnout and rupture and repair. And as someone with a background in addiction work, I think about how substance use in families affects children, even when no one is openly talking about it. As a nurse and a psych NP student, I think about sleep and brain development and anxiety and attention and medication and the body's stress response. As a former teacher and school counselor, I think about how hard it is to actually apply all of these ideas when you're tired, underpaid, being watched, trying to meet standards, and managing a room full of students with different needs. So when I talk about trauma-informed leadership, I'm not talking about a polished idea that sounds nice in a training. I'm talking about some practical, real-life ways that we can start to shift the needle just a little bit. We can hold expectations without humiliation. We can stay curious without becoming permissive. We can set boundaries without becoming harsh. We can repair when we get it wrong. That's probably the most important one. And we can build systems so people are not surviving on personal sacrifice alone. That's the heart of this episode. Just pick one of these things and think, how do I make it work? Because trauma-informed leadership and education is not one person's job. It actually belongs to all of us. It starts in the home, it shows up in the classroom, it's shaped in the building, it's supported by the district, and it's strengthened or weakened by the community. The 5 principles are simple, but they're not always easy. Remember, safety before correction, connection before escalation, structure as support, not punishment, repair after rupture, systems, not superheroes. If we applied these principles more consistently across these 5 areas, I believe we would see healthier kids, healthier educators, healthier schools, and healthier communities. So instead of only asking what's wrong with public education, maybe we should start asking what kind of leadership are we offering around our children in every environment that they're in? Where do they need more safety? Where do they need more connection? Where do they need more structure? And where do they need more repair? Where have we been expecting superheroes instead of building systems? I'm grateful for the opportunity that I had to talk to Brad about this and for everything that it brought up. If you guys are interested, there is a digital download on my website at valentinecounseling.org where we talk about the 5 principles across the 5 environments. And so go check that out. Again, valentinecounseling.org. Thank you so much for listening to the For Peyton podcast. For Pete's sake, take care of yourself and each other. Thank you so much for spending time with me on the For Peyton podcast. My hope is that this conversation gave you something to think about, something to carry with you, or maybe a reminder that you're not alone. If you'd like to go deeper, you'll find companion episodes and related digital downloads for each topic at valentinecounseling.org. This will help you continue reflecting, learning, and applying what resonates. Until next time, for Pete's sake, take care of yourself and each other. This is For Peyton.